Hi everybody, I hope you're doing well, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch my whiskey wandering videos. This time I'm here at Costco Playa Del Rey in Los Angeles, which usually has some pretty good stuff because it's kind of a fancy part of town. Now, before we get to it though, if you like these videos of me whiskey shopping at Costco, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when my newest videos get put up. So thanks again, and let's get to it. Now we can start to see two things really beginning to play out here at Costco. One is that they are ramping up for St. Patrick's Day, which is a holiday that was designed specifically for drinking. So there's a lot of kind of like cheaper alcohol available, skewing towards the Irish side of things, or Irish-ish even sides of things. Even things like Kentucky Owl, for example, which is quote-unquote the St. Patrick's Day edition, which is the bourbon equivalent, I guess, of everybody is Irish on St. Patrick's Day. The other is that there are some random types of whiskey showing up, things like this H&M whiskey, which is from Israel, as well as I have seen whiskey from Taiwan, China, and India. So I think they're really trying to fill the gaps that are being left by those limited supplies of things like Japanese whiskey, Scotch, and bourbon supplies on the shelf. Now this trip, there are a couple of whiskeys that I really want to talk about, mainly about their price and should you or I buy them. The first of which is this Kurayoshi Malt whiskey. Now, the Kurayoshi Malt whiskey, I've seen a number of Costco's, and they always seem to be really in plentiful supply. I truly have considered really buying it maybe once or twice. I look at it a couple times, and since I'm looking to get more Japanese whiskey to my collection, but something always seems to be a little bit off-putting about them. And I guess as I do a little bit of research for this, with good reason. So first, the price at Costco right now is at $79.99. The high and low prices found in the area online are at $199 and the low at $79.99, which puts the average price out there in the wild at $139.99, which is kind of high when you hear a little bit more about this whiskey. The ABV on it is at 46%, so it's got a little bit of kick, but it seems to be within the normal parameters of Japanese whiskey alcoholiness. And the tasting notes from the reviews describe it as honey, sweetness, Granny Smith apples, and bright wine. So that's all fairly normal, but the unnerving part about this one is the fact that it's actually really not Japanese whiskey, but is Scotch hiding in Japanese whiskey clothing. This seems to be much more a sophisticated attempt to profiteer by money-grabbing whiskey makers to fill that widening shortage of actual delicious, beautiful, and increasingly really rare legit Japanese whiskey, and to fill it with whiskey that is shipped to Japanese areas, shipped to Japan, and then it's stored there for a couple years, and then voila, presto changeo, now it's quote-unquote Japanese whiskey. Now, while this is all legal, it is most definitely dishonest. And the product says that it is a product of Japan, which it is, which according to the rules is correct, but it's not actually of Japan, if you catch my drift. This is not the lost on the reviews online, who in general give the whiskey a mediocre score in the high 60s out of 100, but also drink it in despair as they realize they've been duped by Costco and clever marketing ploys by the Kurayoshi people. So in conclusion for me, this is going to be on the banned list of whiskeys for me to buy. I will never buy this whiskey because of really the intellectual dishonesty it represents. And if you end up buying it, well, I mean, it's only going to encourage more shameless money grabs like this from companies who want to cash in on the enjoyment that many of us have found on Japanese whiskeys. Now, the next whiskey that showed up in this Costco is the M&H Elements Single Malt. And every time I think of this, I keep confusing it with those B&H commercials from the YouTube with the camera people in New York. But anyways, the M&H whiskeys is another whiskey that does not seem to be flying off the shelves at any of the Costco's that I've seen it at. And I think part of the reason is that it doesn't really fit into the mold of what the average whiskey drinker thinks about when buying whiskeys. I mean, it's not Scotch, it's not bourbon, it's not from Ireland, it's not increasingly from Japan, but it's another outlier whiskey type. This one is specifically from Israel, not particularly known for making world-class whiskeys. But I think Costco ends up buying them and just to kind of throw them out there and have some oddball whiskeys to see how they sell, and maybe they might. This is probably one of those whiskeys. The price at Costco is at $49.99, which the high and the low cost in the wild is at $72.99 and $49.93, which puts that average cost at $61.46. The The alcohol by volume or ABV is at 46%, which is kind of in the middle of booziness. And there are not a lot of reviews on this whiskey. I imagine, again, because it doesn't fit in the little box of what people like, and therefore what people end up reviewing. But of the reviews that I could find, they did mention that it has a lot of potential if it is aged for a longer period of time. Things like taste young are stated. It's aged in sherry casks, which gives it that distinctive finish, which is walnutty and citrusy and caramel, with a hinge of herbal lemongrass as described, but is still rough around the edges. Without many reviews, though, there are not many scores and even less videos about people drinking it. So this is another bottle I will likely pass each time I see it, unless I'm feeling outlandish and want to blow some of my hard-earned whiskey budget on a complete wild card of whiskey. Also, it would be hard to justify to buy it to add to my collection unless, I start having a Beyond section in the collection, like at Bed Bath & Beyond. We get kind of weird, quirky, and outlandish whiskeys from all over the world. I'm just not there yet. Now, the next whiskey that really caught my eye on this trip was one that I have seen and passed by a few times, and each time I do, I feel a little stronger and stronger urge to pick some up. Although I've never had it, and from the reviews now, I think I'm finally tipped over the edge to want to get a few bottles, and that is the Green Spot Pot Stills Irish Whiskey. There does tend to be a lot of these on the shelves at Costco and not selling that fast, so it's kind of made me a little bit leery, but maybe the situation is just where Costco has ordered so much of it that they just can't get rid of it fast enough. But the Costco price right now is at $41.99, and that is after a $6 discount because it's on sale. So they are obviously trying to get rid of it. Now, the high and the low of it in the wild is at $55.99 and $45.87, with the average price at $50.93. The ABV on it is at 40%, which is a little bit low for my preference. It's not a soft drink, but it's definitely lower than what I normally like to drink. But it could be good if you're trying to not get that burn that comes from alcohol, from high-proof whiskey, and if you're not trying to get too tipsy too fast. The average scores that are showing on the reviews online are at around 90, so that's a pretty big plus on my book. And people in general really seem to like it, even those reviewers who had given it scores on the lower side. Of course, the added benefit of this sale does make this bottle particularly more attractive to me. And the tasting notes use words like malty, dried fruit, caramel, spice, honey, drizzled granola, and further light notes of citrus, tangerine, and rice pudding, which, sounds pretty good. It sounds like Thanksgiving dinner or something. Now, the Green Spot doesn't have a stated age on it, but it has the youngest whiskey, which is 7 years that's in it, but it has much older whiskeys also mixed in. It's distilled by Middleton, which puts it in the same family as Redbreast, which I do love, as well as Middleton whiskey and Power Irish whiskeys. So overall, I think I come across this whiskey again, I will probably definitely end up buying it. And then hopefully, if I try it and if it's great, and after St. Patrick's Day, if there's any of it left, because they bought so much of it, there might even be a bigger discount. So the conclusion on this one is I guess I plan to buy some now, and then after St. Patrick's Day, buy a little bit later. So this can round out my Irish wing of my whiskey collection. Now, the last whiskey I'm going to talk about is from this trip, is a whiskey that is a revival of an old Irish whiskey brand called Roe Co Whiskey. Originally, Roe Co Whiskey had been big producers in Ireland back in the 19th century and had eventually gone out of business in 1926 and then reopened in 2017 by distiller Diageo. So Roe Co is now back on the shelves, hoping to bring back some of that old-timey 19th century charisma around Irish whiskey. The price at Costco is a very reasonable $25.99, while on the street you can find it for as high as $49.99 or as low as $29.99, which puts the average at $39.99. Now, the alcohol by volume on it is at 45% ABV, so it's not the strongest spirit out there, but will definitely do the trick in a pinch. And the toasting notes on it give it a light flavor that doesn't last very long. It's sweet, honey, orange zest, and has floral elements. The average scores that were given online is at 74, which squarely puts it in the, let's drink it on a Wednesday category. But nothing really to write home about in this specific whiskey. In the end, I do like the old-timiness of the bottle, so that makes a plus in my book. and it seems to be relatively new on the scene in its newest rendition, and maybe that's why there isn't much buying of it right now. Also, it could be because there's a lot of other really great whiskeys showing up on Costco's shelves right now, and I imagine people like me and others and you out there are using your whiskey budgets towards that rather than getting these relatively unknown and less expensive whiskeys. But I will definitely have my eye on it, and if I have a couple extra bucks left over at the end of the month in my whiskey budget, but maybe not enough to buy a higher end whiskey, I may splurge just to try this one out and see how it goes. All right, so that was it for today's Whiskey Wandering at Costco, Playa Del Rey, Los Angeles. Thank you again so much for watching until the end, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, remember, please, don't forget to like and subscribe. And that way you can get notified when my newest videos get put up. And also, by the way, don't forget, if you see whiskey you love, just buy it. Because if you don't, somebody else surely will, and it might even be me. So have a great rest of your day. I'm out. Adios.